Imagine thinking you've seen it all, only to realize you never really knew the woman you just divorced. A black wife, graceful and quiet, signs the divorce papers without a fight. No begging, no tears, just a calm smile and one final secret that changed everything. She had walked away from the marriage with nothing, or so he thought. But just weeks later, she dropped a truth so powerful, so unexpected. It shattered his world and flipped the script on who really won. This isn't just a story about love lost. It's a story about legacy, strength, and the quiet power of a woman who knew exactly who she was, even when others didn't. Stick around to the end, because what she reveals will not only leave him speechless, it might just leave you rethinking everything you thought you knew about love, power, and respect. Thank you for stopping by this channel. It means the world to us. If you love powerful, real-life stories with twists you never see coming, hit that subscribe button, smash that like, and don't forget to share this video with someone who needs a reminder that silence doesn't mean weakness, and walking away might just be the biggest win of all. All right, let's get into the full story. Once it's in writing, it's binding, Naomi said, her voice steady, yet laced with the finality of her decision. In that moment, she knew her battle was no longer just about marriage. It was about taking control of her future, her legacy. As the tension in the courtroom reached its peak, Naomi's world had shifted, and the stakes couldn't have been higher. What would happen when all her secrets were laid bare? Could she take down the man who had controlled her life for so long? As you follow Naomi's incredible journey, we want to know where you're watching from, and what's your prediction for the end of her story? Will she emerge victorious, or will her past catch up with her? Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for the latest twists and to see what unfolds next. Share your thoughts in the comments below. We can't wait to hear from you. Naomi Sinclair stood in the courtroom, the weight of the moment pressing heavily on her chest. The gavel echoed through the sterile space, marking the end of a chapter in her life that she had once believed would last forever. Her eyes flickered toward Ethan Prescott, her now estranged husband, who sat across from her, his face a mask of smug satisfaction. He had been confident throughout the entire divorce process, as if this was just another deal to be signed, another victory to claim. She could feel his eyes on her, cold and dismissive, as he picked up the pen to sign the divorce papers. "You don't have anything, Naomi," he sneered, his voice laced with contempt. "You're finished." The word stung, sharper than any physical blow could have been. For a moment, she thought she might crumble under the weight of them, but then she steadied herself. This was it, she thought. The end? Or was it the beginning? As she watched him sign, Naomi's mind wandered back to the first time she had met Ethan, a time when he had been her everything. He had been the golden boy, the man she thought she could trust with her heart, her future, and her life. At first, it felt like a dream, a life that many would envy. A handsome, wealthy, and successful man who seemed to see her as more than just a woman in his life. She had been young, naive, and eager to believe in the fairy tale. Ethan had been perfect in her eyes, tall, blonde, and impossibly charming, with a life full of promise and ambition. To Naomi, he was the kind of man who could make all her dreams come true, someone who could take her from her modest roots and place her on a pedestal she had never imagined. But as she thought back on those early days, she could now see the cracks, small, almost imperceptible at first, but gradually widening until they consumed everything. The early days of their marriage had been filled with moments of hope. Ethan had praised her for her intelligence and ambition, often telling her she was destined for greatness. He loved her for her kindness, her ambition, and her willingness to support his career. He told her that she was his equal, his partner, and they were going to build an empire together. It was the kind of love she had always dreamed of, and for a while she had allowed herself to believe it was real. But it was all a carefully constructed facade. As time passed, Naomi began to notice the subtle shifts in Ethan's behavior. He no longer seemed to admire her efforts or appreciate her sacrifices. His compliments became fewer, and the praise she had once received now felt more like a hollow gesture. Ethan had started to mock her job as a teacher, belittling her aspirations in the work she loved. "It's cute that you want to teach," he had once said, the smile on his face almost condescending. "But don't you want to do something more meaningful, something that matters?" She had smiled and nodded, hiding the hurt that crept into her heart. He had always claimed to support her dreams, but it was clear now that his support was conditional, only as long as it didn't interfere with his ambitions. Soon after, Ethan's true nature began to reveal itself in ways that left Naomi feeling helpless and small. The man who once held her hand with pride now barely glanced in her direction. His focus was always elsewhere, always on his business, always on his increasing success. And then there was Sabrina Langford, the woman who had quietly stepped into their lives with a smile that could melt even the coldest of hearts. At first, Naomi had brushed it off as nothing more than a business associate, a colleague with whom Ethan worked closely. But the longer she observed, the more she noticed the subtle glances, the lingering touches, the way Sabrina's laughter seemed to echo in Ethan's ears in a way that Naomi's never did. It wasn't long before she began to feel like a ghost in her marriage. Ethan no longer made her feel like his partner. Instead, she felt like a decoration in his life, a mere accessory to the power and wealth he was accumulating. The distance between them grew, and with it her feelings of isolation. He had become a stranger, someone who barely acknowledged her presence unless it was to criticize her or remind her of her place. On the surface, everything looked perfect. They attended events together, glamorous parties, charity galas, and business dinners where Ethan was always the center of attention. Naomi would stand beside him, smiling for the cameras, playing the part of the supportive wife. But as she looked at him during these events, she realized how little he truly saw her. His eyes would often wander, seeking out the admiration of others, particularly Sabrina, who was always by his side, laughing a little too loudly, her eyes a little too bright. Naomi had become invisible, a mere afterthought in a life that was no longer her own. She had spent years supporting Ethan, putting his dreams ahead of hers, sacrificing her aspirations for his success. She had given up so much for this marriage only to be reduced to a shadow of the woman she once was. She had always been told that love was a partnership, a mutual understanding and respect. But with Ethan, it had never felt that way. It had always been about what he wanted, what he needed, and how she could serve those desires. The sound of the gavel crashing against it would broke her thoughts, pulling her back to the present. Ethan had finished signing the papers, and the divorce was final. She felt a wave of emptiness wash over her. But beneath it, something else stirred, a spark of determination. She wasn't finished, not by a long shot. She had more to give, and this time would be for her. The days following the signing of the divorce papers felt like an endless blur for Naomi. The weight of Ethan's cold dismissal lingered in the back of her mind, gnawing at her thoughts. Even as she tried to reclaim some semblance of control over her life, she threw herself into her work, teaching, a job she once loved, but now felt like an obligation, a task that kept her from confronting the harsh truth of her marriage's demise. Yet, as she navigated the quiet corridors of her life, the deeper reality of what was happening, began to surface in fragments, like jagged shards of glass cutting through her peace. Ethan had always been a charming man, the one who dazzled others with his charisma. But Naomi had begun to notice how that same charm was used to manipulate. He'd never outright belittled her in front of others. No, his tactics were far more subtle. Instead of being open about his dismissive attitude toward her career, he would offer helpful advice, suggesting she might want to pursue something more rewarding than teaching. At first, it seemed like genuine concern, his voice smooth and reassuring. But Naomi soon realized that it was simply a veiled insult. "You could be doing so much more, Naomi," he would say, his words dripping with thinly veiled condescension. "You could be so much more than a teacher. Just think about it." At first, she would laugh it off, brushing it aside with a smile, but the sting of it had begun to grow sharper, piercing her sense of self-worth little by little. One evening, Naomi stumbled upon something that shook her to the core. It had been a routine evening. She was sitting in their expansive kitchen, sipping her tea, flipping through a book, when Ethan's phone buzzed on the counter. Normally, she wouldn't have thought twice about his phone. After all, they were married, weren't they? But this time, something about the message caught her attention. The sender was an unknown number, and the message, though brief, sent a chill crawling up her spine. Everything is set. She'll never know. The land is ours. Naomi's fingers trembled as she stared at the words. The land is ours. It wasn't the first time she had heard about her father's land being a point of contention between them, but it had always been a quiet matter, nothing overt. Now here was confirmation that Ethan's interest in her family's land was more than just a casual investment. It was a scheme, a plan to take something that wasn't his. She quickly snapped a photo of the message and put the phone back, her mind racing. But before she could process it fully, she heard the sound of footsteps approaching, and she quickly shoved the phone back into its place, trying to steady her breathing. That night, sleep eluded her. She lay awake in their large, cold bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying the message over and over in her head. What had she missed? How long had Ethan been planning this? It had always felt like something was off, but she had never imagined that he would go so far as to deceive her about something so crucial, so deeply tied to her family. As the realization settled into her chest, anger bubbled up, hot and furious. But it was mixed with a deep sense of betrayal. He had lied to her for years, and now she was just beginning to see the extent of his manipulation. The next morning, she woke with a new resolve. She wasn't going to let Ethan get away with this. Not this time. He had taken enough from her, her sense of self, her dreams, and now he was trying to take what her father had left her. Naomi knew she couldn't let this continue, but there was one problem. She had no idea what to do next. Ethan had always been the one in control, always the one with the power. She had been content to follow his lead, believing that together they could conquer the world. But now she saw that he had only been using her to build his empire, to secure his future at the expense of hers. The truth hit her like a freight train. Ethan had been playing a game all along, and she had been his pawn. But Naomi was done being a pawn. She was no longer willing to be the quiet, supportive wife. It was time for her to take control of her own life and her future. The days ahead would not be easy. She knew that taking on Ethan would be like stepping into a lion's den. But for the first time in a long time, Naomi felt a spark of something powerful stir within her. Defiance. She wasn't going to let him destroy her. Not without a fight. The slow unraveling of her marriage had brought her to this point, and now there was no turning back. She was ready to face whatever came next. Naomi had always prided herself on her ability to trust her instincts. Yet, even as she stood in the dimly lit hallway, her mind racing, she couldn't shake the sense that she was about to uncover something that would change everything. The evening had started innocently enough with Ethan attending one of his many business dinners, leaving her alone at home with the silence that had become all too familiar. Yet tonight, she couldn't seem to shake the feeling that something was off. As she made her way through their grand empty house, she passed by Ethan's study, and her gaze fell on his phone, which he left on the desk, forgotten, or so he thought. It wasn't the first time she had seen his phone unattended, but tonight something compelled her to pick it up, to look closer. Her fingers hovered over the screen, trembling slightly, as if some invisible force was pulling her toward the device. She told herself it was wrong to snoop, that she had no reason to intrude into his private space. But the message she had found weeks earlier still gnawed at her mind. The land is ours. The words echoed in her head, and she couldn't help but feel as if this message was just the beginning of something far darker. Ethan's deception had only scratched the surface. She had to know more. The phone buzzed softly, jolting her from her thoughts. With a quiet breath, she picked it up, unlocking the screen. The message that greeted her made her heart race, its content chilling in its clarity. It was from a contact she didn't recognize, a name that was merely a string of numbers. The text read, "She won't know. Not yet. We need to finalize the paperwork. The inheritance will be in our hands soon." Naomi felt the blood drain from her face. This wasn't just about a piece of land. It was about her father's legacy. And worse, it was about Ethan's betrayal. She quickly snapped a photo of the message, her pulse pounding. In her ears, as the reality of the situation sank in, her father's estate was no longer just a family asset. It was a prize to be won, and Ethan was willing to go to any lengths to claim it. The realization was like a slap in the face. And for a moment, Naomi didn't know whether to scream or break down in tears. But she couldn't afford to let herself break now. Not when she was this close. With a quick motion, she placed the phone back where it had been. And just as she turned to leave, she heard the sound of footsteps approaching from the hall. Her heart skipped a beat. Ethan was back. The next few hours passed in a blur. Ethan came home in his usual jovial mood. His voice, too, loud, his laughter too forced. He seemed oblivious to the storm that was brewing inside Naomi. She tried her best to act normal, to smile and nod as he spoke about his day. But every word he uttered felt like a lie, each sentence further burying her in the realization that her life with him had been built on a foundation of deception. She didn't know how much longer she could keep up the charade, but she knew one thing for sure. She couldn't confront him yet. She needed more evidence. She needed to know exactly how far his betrayal ran. Naomi didn't know what she had expected, but seeing them together, the way Sabrina leaned in close to Ethan, her laughter ringing out in the night, it confirmed everything she had suspected. There was more to their relationship than she had been willing to admit. She had thought it was just an affair, a betrayal of her trust, but now she knew that this was something far more dangerous. It wasn't just about infidelity. It was about power, about control, and about taking what wasn't theirs. As she stood there in the darkness, watching them drive away, Naomi realized that this wasn't just a breakdown of a marriage. It was the unraveling of everything she had believed in, and she was determined to get to the bottom of it, no matter what it took. A week later, Naomi received an unexpected invitation. A phone call from a number she didn't recognize brought her into the world of secrets she had been desperate to uncover. The voice on the other end was low, cautious. "Naomi Sinclair, the man," asked, his tone too careful. "I have information you might be interested in. Meet me at the cafe on 5th Street at 3 p.m. LL know who I am when you get there. No name, no explanation, just an invitation to meet." She had no idea what to expect, but she knew one thing. She couldn't let this opportunity slip away. She wasn't going to wait for Ethan to bury her under his lies. This was her chance to get the truth. When she arrived at the cafe, it was empty except for a man. Sitting in the back corner, his face was hidden behind a newspaper, but his posture was unmistakable. A sense of purpose radiated from him. Naomi approached cautiously, her nerves tingling with both anticipation and fear. As she sat down across from him, he lowered the newspaper, revealing a face that she didn't recognize. Yet, something about him felt familiar, like a shadow from the past. His eyes were sharp, calculating, as if he had been waiting for her for years. "I've been following your husband for some time now," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "You need to know what he's been hiding." The man handed her an envelope. Its contents, a collection of documents, photographs, and notes. The details were damning. Accounts in foreign banks, shady transactions linked to offshore companies, and most crucially, proof that Ethan had been colluding with Sabrina to manipulate Naomi's family's estate. The documents were more than just incriminating. They were the keys to unraveling the empire Ethan had built on lies and deceit. Naomi's hands shook as she flipped through the pages, her mind reeling. But there was one thing that stood out above the rest. A letter written in Ethan's hand, confirming everything. Once she's out of the way, everything will be ours. Naomi's heart raced. This was it. This was the truth she had been searching for. Ethan hadn't just betrayed her. He had been plotting against her from the very beginning, using her trust to destroy everything her father had built. The man across from her watched her closely, his expression unreadable. "You're not the first to be deceived by him," he said softly, "but you'll be the last." For the first time in years, Naomi felt a sense of clarity. The path ahead was dangerous, but she was no longer afraid. She had the truth now, and nothing would stop her from taking back what was rightfully hers. She wasn't going to let Ethan win. Not this time. The evening air was thick with a hum of anticipation. As Naomi entered the grand ballroom, the lavish event was being held to celebrate Ethan's latest business venture, the one that had garnered all the attention of Los Angeles' elite. The room sparkled with chandeliers casting a warm glow over the guests and the scent of expensive perfume mixed with the faint notes of champagne in the air. Everyone was here, investors, influencers, power brokers. But Naomi felt out of place in her own life. She had come out of obligation as a beautiful wife, but her heart wasn't in it. Not anymore. Ethan was already the center of attention, his charismatic presence drawing everyone's gaze. His laugh echoed through the room, a sound she had once found endearing, but now felt hollow. Beside him stood Sabrina, his lover, radiant and poised, as though she belonged there by his side. Naomi felt a pang in her chest, but she quickly masked it with a smile, taking a flute of champagne from a passing server to keep her hands occupied. She wasn't going to let this facade break her. Not tonight. As she moved through the crowd, Naomi felt like a shadow among the sparkling figures around her. Ethan and Sabrina were positioned at the heart of the room, their laughter louder than anyone else's, their chemistry undeniable. Ethan's hand lingered a moment too long on Sabrina's back as he leaned in to whisper something in her ear, and a smile on Sabrina's lips was a little too genuine, a little too affectionate. Naomi couldn't tear her eyes away, but the sight of them together, so comfortable and intimate, sent a wave of nausea crashing over her. How long had this been going on? How long had he been planning this right under her nose? She wanted to scream, to confront him right there in front of everyone. But the whispers in her head told her to wait, to gather more, to strike when it would hurt him the most. Naomi's breath caught in her throat. The words felt like an ice-cold knife in her chest. And for a moment, the world around her blurred. It wasn't just about her father's land anymore. It was about something darker, something far more sinister. She'd known that Ethan had been hiding things from her. But this was proof that her worst fears had been realized. This wasn't just an affair. This wasn't just betrayal. This was an orchestrated plot to rob her of everything she held dear. Her inheritance, her father's legacy. It was all part of a game to be won. And she was the pawn. Naomi's fingers tightened around the phone as a wave of anger and disbelief surged through her. She had been played for a fool. All these years, everything Ethan had said, everything he had promised had been lies. His affection for her had been nothing more than a facade, a calculated part of his plan to get what he wanted. She quickly snapped a photo of the message, her hand shaking as she took a screenshot. The plan was clear now. Ethan had been using her, manipulating her at every turn, and Sabrina was right. They're playing her part. But this wasn't just about their infidelity. It was about a betrayal that cut deeper, a betrayal that threatened everything her father had built. Naomi knew she couldn't let this go. She couldn't let them win. The question now was how far. Ethan had gone. How much damage had already been done? Her mind raced as she carefully placed the phone back into her purse, making sure no one saw her. She couldn't afford to let anyone know what she had uncovered. Not yet. Naomi's heart pounded as she slipped back into the main ballroom, her mind still reeling from the discovery. She scanned the room for Ethan, but he was nowhere to be seen. Sabrina, on the other hand, was standing by the large windows, her gaze focused on the city lights outside. Naomi watched her for a moment, a wave of disgust rising in her chest. The woman seemed completely unaware of the storm that was about to hit. As she approached, she could hear Sabrina speaking to a few of the guests, laughing, her voice light and melodic. Naomi's gaze hardened. She was no longer the naive woman she had been just days ago. Tonight, everything had changed. She wasn't going to be some passive observer in her own life. She was going to fight. The thought burned through her like fire, a quiet fury that began to build within her. Ethan finally appeared, walking toward her with that same fake warmth he had used so many times before. "There you are," he said, his voice too cheerful, too rehearsed. "I was starting to wonder where you went." Naomi forced a smile, though it felt like her lips were made of stone. "Just needed a moment," she replied, her voice steady, but ice cold. Ethan didn't seem to notice the shift in her demeanor. He placed a hand on her lower back and guided her toward the group of investors. "Let's join the others," he said, his voice full of false sweetness. Naomi nodded, walking beside him, her every step fueled by the anger that was rapidly consuming her. She couldn't help but think of the message of the lies, of the plans Ethan and Sabrina had made for her future, plans that didn't include her. But as they moved toward the crowd, something inside Naomi clicked. She wasn't going to let him control her any longer. She wasn't going to play the role of the beautiful wife any longer. She had the evidence now. She had the power. She just had to hold on to it long enough to make her move. As they joined the group, Naomi glanced over at Ethan. His smile was still wide, but there was a crack in his facade now. Something she could see, but he couldn't. She wasn't the same woman who had stood beside him at countless parties, pretending everything was fine. Tonight, everything had changed, and she would make sure Ethan knew it. The next morning, Naomi was determined to uncover the truth. She couldn't allow herself to wallow in the shock of her discovery. She had to act. She spent the morning in her father's old study, carefully combing through the papers he had left behind. The room smelled faintly of wood and old leather, memories of days long past, when things had been simpler, when her father had been alive and had trusted her to carry on his legacy. But now those memories felt tainted, distorted by the truth she had uncovered. As she flipped through the pages of deeds, contracts, and financial documents, the enormity of what Ethan had done began to sink in. He had manipulated her at every turn, hiding his actions behind smooth talk and false promises. She found a series of transactions, large sums of money moving to accounts that she had never seen before. They were tied to offshore companies, the same ones that had been mentioned in the message. The land her father had painstakingly built up, the property that meant so much to her, was slipping through her fingers, used as collateral in a game she hadn't even realized she was playing. Ethan had been preparing for this for a long time, and now she was realizing just how deep his treachery ran. With a growing sense of urgency, Naomi knew she needed help. She needed someone who understood the financial and legal complexities that were unfolding around her. She couldn't do this on her own, not with Ethan's resources, not with the way he had planned every step of his betrayal. She thought of a name that had been mentioned to her once by a colleague who had worked with him before, a lawyer with a reputation for handling difficult and high-stakes cases. His name was Michael Foster, a lawyer known for his ruthlessness and sharp mind, someone who had been recommended by more than one person in their circle. If anyone could help her understand what Ethan had done and how to stop it, it was him. Naomi hesitated for only a moment before dialing the number she had saved from the back of her mind. The phone rang several times before a deep voice answered on the other end. Michael Foster. The voice said, steady and professional, "How can I help you?" Naomi's heart raced as she gathered her thoughts, knowing that once she made this call, there would be no turning back. "Mr. Foster, I need your help." "It's urgent," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've come across something. Something that involves my husband, Ethan Prescott. I believe he's been hiding something from me. Something that could destroy everything I've worked for, everything my father left me." There was a brief silence on the other end of the line before Michael's voice cut through. "Come to my office. We'll talk about it there. Bring everything you have, and we'll figure out what's going on." Naomi's heart dropped. She had suspected as much, but hearing it out loud made it all the more real. Michael continued, flipping through the paper she had handed him. "These transactions, these offshore accounts, they're not just part of some business deal. They're being used to siphon off assets, Naomi. Your father's estate, the land, everything he worked for. It's being funneled into a network of accounts designed to hide the money from you." He paused, looking at her with a serious expression. "Your husband has been setting this up for years, but there's one thing he didn't count on. You." Naomi felt a surge of both fear and determination. The walls of Ethan's world had been built on lies, but now they were beginning to crumble. "What do I do now?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Michael leaned back in his chair, his fingers tapping the table thoughtfully. "We gather everything, every document, every piece of evidence you have. We need to build a case that will stand up in court. If Ethan has been hiding assets, using your family's property for his gain, it's fraud and it's criminal." He paused, his gaze locking with hers. "You're going to need to be ready for a fight. Ethan is not going to let this go easily, but you're not alone in this anymore. I'll help you take him down." The words hung in the air between them, the weight of them settling heavily on Naomi's shoulders. She had never imagined that her life would come to this, that she would be sitting in a lawyer's office preparing to wage war against a man she had once loved. But now there was no turning back. She had to protect her father's legacy. She had to protect herself. And for the first time in a long time, Naomi felt the spark of something she had almost forgotten, the power to fight back. The next few weeks passed in a blur of legal meetings, late nights going through documents and planning strategies with Michael. Ethan, completely unaware of the storm that was brewing, continued with his life, his business, and his affair with Sabrina, believing that everything was still under his control. But Naomi was no longer the woman who had once quietly accepted his betrayal. She was a woman with a purpose now, a woman ready to take on the fight that would change everything. The fight for her future, the fight for her father's legacy, the fight for justice. Naomi stood in front of her bathroom mirror, staring at her reflection, a stranger looking back at her. The woman she saw was no longer the naive wife, the woman who had silently accepted Ethan's control and lies. She had become someone different, stronger, more determined, but also filled with gnawing fear that seemed to rise like an unseen tide, threatening to overwhelm her at every turn. Her father's words echoed in her mind. "The only thing that stands between you and your future is your ability to fight for it." She had never truly understood what he meant until now. Until this moment, standing on the precipice of a battle that would take everything she had to win. Ethan had taken enough from her already. Her trust, her peace of mind, her belief in their marriage. And now he was going to take her legacy, too. But she wasn't going to let him. Not without a fight. The phone call with Michael had been the turning point. For the first time in what felt like forever, Naomi had a plan. She had gathered everything, all the evidence she could find, bank records, legal documents, photos, and she knew the truth. Now, Ethan's scheme wasn't just about betrayal and infidelity. It was about control, about stealing from her family's future, about erasing everything that mattered to her. She had the tools, the knowledge, and the drive to take him down. But even with all that, a part of her hesitated. There was still a nagging feeling deep inside, a fear she couldn't shake. What if she was too late? What if Ethan had already won, already secured his place in the life she had once shared with him? And what if, just maybe, she wasn't strong enough to face him? But then there were moments when Naomi would feel a flicker of hope. Hope that this struggle would lead to something more than just survival. That it would lead to freedom. Freedom from Ethan. Freedom from the chains of her past. And freedom from the fear that had always held her back. It was a terrifying thought, but it was also exhilarating. She wasn't just fighting for her family's land. She was fighting for herself, for the woman she had almost forgotten she was, the woman who had sacrificed too much for too long. She had been content to hide in Ethan's shadow, to play the role he had set for her, but no longer. It wasn't just the legal battle she was facing, though. Naomi felt the weight of something more primal, something more insidious. She had never been one to shy away from confrontation, but this was different. This wasn't just about fighting for what was hers. It was about fighting for her freedom, for her sanity, and for a future that had been stolen from her. She had to confront the fear that had lived inside her for years. The fear that she wasn't enough, that she wasn't worthy of standing up to someone like Ethan, that she couldn't win. But she wasn't that woman anymore. She had to remind herself that she had the power to change her story, to rewrite her future. The following evening, as she sat alone at the kitchen table, going over the evidence with Michael over the phone, Naomi heard the familiar sound of Ethan's car pulling into the driveway. Her pulse quickened. She had been dreading this moment, the moment when Ethan would return home and pretend that everything was normal. She had to face him. She had to see his face when he realized that the game was over, that his empire of lies was about to crumble. Her stomach twisted in knots, but she couldn't avoid it anymore. She had to be strong, not just for herself, but for the legacy her father had left her. When Ethan walked in, his smile faded as he saw her sitting there, her posture straighter, her eyes clearer than he had ever seen them. He stopped in his tracks, a flicker of something, fear maybe, crossing his face before he masked it with a smile. "Naomi," he said, his voice too calm, too controlled. "I didn't expect you to be up so late. Everything all right?" Naomi didn't answer him immediately. Instead, she picked up the stack of papers on the table and slid them across to him. "You've been busy," she said, her voice steady but ice cold. "But you didn't think I'd find out, did you?" Ethan's expression faltered for a brief moment before he quickly recovered. "What are you talking about?" he asked, his voice still smooth, though there was an edge to it now. "You're upset about something. Let's talk about it." "Okay." "No," she said, standing up. Now, the words coming out with force she hadn't expected. "We're not going to talk. You're going to listen. This is over, Ethan. I know everything." Her hands trembled, but she held her ground. "The land, the money, the lies, it's all here. Everything you've been hiding." For the first time in their marriage, Naomi saw a flicker of something genuine in Ethan's eyes. Fear. He tried to mask it, but it was too late. The mask had already slipped. "You think you can just take me down?" he spat, his voice rising. "You think you can destroy everything I've built?" "I don't need to destroy you, Ethan," she said, her voice colder now than it had ever been. "You've already done that yourself. All I need to do is show everyone who you are." Naomi's heart pounded in her chest. The fear still there, but now it was a weapon, a driving force. She had no choice but to face it, to confront the man who had controlled her for so long. And as the anger built inside her, she realized that her freedom had already begun. The trial began with the usual formalities, but it wasn't long before the moment Naomi had been waiting for arrived. Michael rose to his feet, confident and poised, and addressed the court. "Your Honor, we are here today not only to discuss a marriage that has ended, but to reveal a much deeper betrayal, a betrayal of trust, of family, and of legal and ethical boundaries. We will present evidence showing that Ethan Prescott, my client's estranged husband, has been using his position and influence to unlawfully manipulate and siphon off assets that rightfully belong to Mrs. Carter." Ethan's lawyer immediately shot to his feet, interrupting the flow of the proceedings. "Objection, Your Honor. The claims being made are unfounded and inflammatory, the defense. Attorney argued, my client has done nothing wrong, and we will prove that this entire case is based on assumptions and half-truths. But the judge, a seasoned man who had seen his fair share of contentious divorce cases, waved the objection aside with a flick of his wrist. Sustained. Continue, Mr. Foster, the judge ordered. Michael nodded and turned back to the jury, his eyes flicking to Naomi before he began laying out the case. We will show you, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, that Ethan Whitaker has not only betrayed his wife, but has engaged in criminal activity. We have financial records, bank transfers, documents from offshore accounts, and witness testimony that will demonstrate his attempt to embezzle funds from Mrs. Carter's family estate. Naomi could feel the weight of every word Michael spoke, but at the same time, she could feel her pulse quicken with anticipation. This was it, the moment when everything Ethan had done would be exposed for all to see. Michael turned and gestured for the first piece of evidence to be presented, a large screen. On the wall lit up with bank statements, each one linked to accounts that had been opened without Naomi's knowledge. The sums were staggering, and the dates showed a clear pattern of manipulation. Ethan had been siphoning off money from his estate for years, redirecting funds to offshore accounts under his control. The prosecutor clicked through each page, pointing out the specific transactions and how they correlated with key moments in their marriage. Every document, every figure, every detail painted a picture of a man who had not only betrayed his wife's trust, but had also broken the law in the process. As the evidence mounted, Ethan's calm demeanor began to crack. His face flushed as he watched the projections on the screen. The once impassive expression now replaced with a flicker of panic that couldn't be hidden. He shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his hand gripping the table in front of him as if he could will the evidence away. Naomi noticed the change immediately. For the first time in a long time, she saw Ethan for what he truly was, nothing more than a man who had used his charm and deceit to manipulate and control everyone around him. She thought about all the years she had spent in his shadow, believing in his promises, trusting in his words, and how it had all been a lie. She had been a pawn in his game, and today she was finally taking back control. As Michael continued to present the case, the jury was visibly shaken. Some of them exchanged looks, their eyes wide with disbelief as the true extent of Ethan's deception became clear. But the most damning part of all came when Michael called Richard Hayes to the stand. Hayes was an investor who had once worked closely with Ethan. His testimony was crucial because it tied Ethan directly to the fraudulent activities. Richard Hayes took the stand, his voice shaky as he recounted the details of how Ethan had manipulated the financials and used his influence to divert funds that weren't his to take. I was paid off, Hayes said, his voice low but firm. Ethan promised me a cut if I helped him cover up the transactions, but I knew it was wrong. I knew what he was doing, and I couldn't let him get away with it. Hayes' testimony was the final blow to Ethan's defense, and as he sat down, Naomi could see the panic settle over her unwrung husband's face. Ethan's lawyer tried to recover, but it was too late. The evidence was overwhelming, and the jury was already making up its mind. Naomi's heart was pounding as Michael stood to give his closing remarks. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this case is not just about money or assets. It's about trust. It's about the betrayal of a woman who dedicated her life to a man who didn't value her, a man who used her and her family's wealth for his gain. We ask you to consider the evidence and deliver a verdict that reflects the truth that has been hidden for far too long. As Michael finished, Naomi could barely contain the surge of emotion that overwhelmed her. This was it. After everything, the lies, the manipulation, the fear, it was all coming to an end. The judge banged his gavel, and the courtroom went quiet. The jury deliberated for what felt like hours, but when they returned, their verdict was clear. The judge read the verdict aloud, his voice cutting through the silence. We find in favor of Naomi Sinclair, the defendant, Ethan Prescott, is hereby found guilty of fraudulent activity and embezzlement. Mrs. Carter is entitled to full control of her family's estate and assets. The words hit Naomi like a tidal wave. She had won. Ethan had been exposed for who he was, and now she had everything she needed to rebuild her life. The courtroom erupted into a murmur of shock and disbelief, but Naomi barely heard the noise. She was too busy staring at Ethan, who now sat slumped in his chair, the weight of his defeat finally sinking in. For the first time in years, Naomi felt free. The courtroom buzzed with a sense of disbelief as the judge's gavel fell, the sharp sound slicing through the tension that had been building for days. Naomi's mind reeled as the words echoed in her ears. In favor of Naomi Sinclair, the defendant, Ethan Prescott, is found guilty of fraudulent activity and embezzlement. The weight of those words settled in her chest, and for a moment she couldn't move. It was finally over. The empire Ethan had built on lies and manipulation was crumbling, and she had fought and won against everything he had thrown at her. She could feel the stars of the people in the courtroom, the murmurs of disbelief, but her eyes were locked on Ethan, whose face was drained of color, his shoulders slumped under the weight of defeat. He hadn't seen this coming, and for the first time, Naomi allowed herself to feel a spark of satisfaction. He had taken so much from her trust, her dignity, her sense of self. But now the tables had turned. The power was hers. As they left the courthouse, the air felt different, lighter, as if the very weight of the world had been lifted off her shoulders. Naomi stepped into bright sunlight, her heart still racing from a verdict. And for the first time in what felt like forever, she felt a sense of freedom that was almost overwhelming. She was free from Ethan's grasp, free from the control he had held over her for so long. She could already feel the shift inside her, the change that was happening, and it was like stepping into a new world. She wasn't just walking away from a marriage that had suffocated her. She was walking into a future she had once thought was out of reach. Michael drove her back to the penthouse, but Naomi wasn't eager to return to a place where so many painful memories had been made. She could feel the sharp contrast between the woman she was now and the woman she had been when she first walked through those doors. The penthouse, once a symbol of Ethan's success, now felt like a cage, a reminder of everything she had been forced to endure. But she wasn't afraid anymore. She was no longer the wife who had been silenced by her husband's dominance. She was Naomi Sinclair, the woman who had fought and won. As she entered the penthouse, she walked straight to the study where the documents from the trial lay, each one a testament to the battle she had fought. But now it wasn't about the past. It was about what came next. Naomi opened the laptop her father had once used, and she began to map out the next steps, the plan that would secure not only her future, but the future of the empire he had built. The legacy that had been almost lost was hers to shape, and she would shape it into something greater than what it had been before. She had been given a second chance, not just to claim her inheritance, but to build something that would last, something that would benefit not only her, but those who had been oppressed by the very people who had tried to exploit her. She didn't have to wait long to start the new chapter of her life. A phone call from a former colleague, someone who had once worked with her father, came the following day. "Naomi, I've heard the news. You've won." The voice said, a mix of admiration and respect in their tone. "If you're serious about carrying on your father's legacy, we can help. We've got the connections, the resources to help you turn this around. You can build something better, something stronger, something the city won't forget." The word struck a chord deep inside her. She had always known that her father's estate had potential, but now with the resources and the people behind her, she could turn it into a force to be reckoned with. She wasn't just inheriting his wealth. She was inheriting his vision, and she was going to make it her own. Over the following weeks, Naomi's vision began to take shape. She worked tirelessly with Michael, not just to secure her financial future, but to lay the groundwork for something that would help others. She wanted to make sure that no one would ever have to suffer the way she had suffered under Ethan's control. She started Carter Justice Solutions, a legal consultancy that would help women and marginalized groups fight against the very injustices she had experienced. She knew the world needed more people who could stand up and speak out against the kind of manipulation she had faced, and she was determined to be the one to do it, with the help of a talented team. She assembled from her father's old network. Naomi began to reshape the company, focusing not just on profit, but on creating a space where people could come for justice, for hope, and for a voice in a world that often silenced them. The first few months were a whirlwind of meetings, phone calls, and late nights. But Naomi thrived in the chaos. She had found her purpose, and she was good at it. She was building something from the ground up, and it wasn't just about business. It was about creating something that could stand the test of time, a legacy that would make her father proud. As Carter Justice Solutions grew, so did Naomi's confidence. The fear that had once paralyzed her was gone, replaced by the certainty that she could achieve anything she set her mind to. She wasn't just rebuilding what Ethan had tried to take from her. She was building an empire of her own, one that would outlast them all. One evening, as she sat in her office overlooking the city skyline, she received a call from Malik, the journalist who had been with her through some of the darkest moments of her journey. "You've done it, Lena," he said, using the nickname that had stuck with her throughout the entire ordeal. "The press is starting to catch on. You're to be a household name soon. You know that, right?" Naomi smiled, her heart swelling with pride. "It's not about fame, Malik," she replied. "It's about creating a future where people don't have to live in fear, where people can stand up for themselves and get the justice they deserve." Malik chuckled on the other end of the line. "And you're to make sure they do. You've got a fire in you, Lena. The world's about to see it." Naomi's empire had only just begun, but already she could feel the weight of its potential. She had won the battle, and now she was poised to take on the world. She wasn't just a woman who had been betrayed. She was a woman who had risen from the ashes, and her light was only getting brighter. The future was hers to shape, and she was ready to face it head-on. Naomi stood at the window, her gaze fixed on the skyline that stretched out before her like an endless sea of possibilities. The glass felt cool against her fingertips, but the warmth of the sun breaking through the clouds bathed her in light. It was a new day, not just in the world outside, but in her life. She had come so far, further than she ever thought possible. And now, standing amid the empire she was building, she could finally breathe. She had taken back control, rebuilt everything that had been taken from her. And now, for the first time in years, she wasn't just surviving, she was thriving. Yet as the sun's rays illuminated the room, casting a golden glow over the sleek modern office, Naomi knew there was more to be done. She had won her battles, but the war was far from over. There was a legacy to protect and a future to secure. The phone on her desk buzzed, pulling her from her thoughts. It was a message from Tanya, her attorney and one of her closest allies throughout the whole ordeal. "I just received word that your latest initiative is getting the attention it deserves. The press is reaching out. They're ready to cover the launch of Carter Justice Solutions. You're going global, Naomi. This is just the beginning." Naomi smiled, feeling a surge of pride. She had always known her father's legacy had power, but now she was reshaping it into something even greater, something that would stand the test of time. Carter Justice Solutions was more than just a business. It was a movement, a platform that would give a voice to the silenced, to those who had been trampled underfoot by the very system that was meant to protect them. The world was watching, and she wasn't about to let them down. But as the excitement bubbled inside her, Naomi knew there was a heavy responsibility resting on her shoulders. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for every woman, every marginalized person who had ever felt small, who had ever been overlooked or dismissed. She had spent too many years being invisible, hiding in the shadows. And now, with her new position of power, she could make sure no one else had to feel that way. But with great power came great risk. The name Lena Carter had already become synonymous with defiance, with breaking through the barriers that sought to keep people down. But with that came threats. Threats that had already started to appear in the form of anonymous messages and veiled warnings. The Mafia still had eyes on her, and they weren't about to forget how Ethan's empire had collapsed. She would need to stay vigilant. Her thoughts were interrupted by the arrival of a courier delivering an envelope she had been anxiously awaiting. It was from the UN, an invitation to speak at a global conference on women's rights and social justice. The words on the letter were simple but powerful. We believe you are the voice the world needs. Your story of overcoming adversity and using your platform to uplift others is exactly the kind of leadership the global community seeks. We invite you to join us in Geneva for a special panel discussion. Naomi's hands trembled as she read the letter, the weight of the invitation sinking in. This was it. This was the moment she had been waiting for, the chance to take her message to the world, to inspire millions of people who were facing the same battle she had fought. She wasn't just going to speak for herself. She was going to speak for everyone who had ever been silenced. She had the chance to change the narrative, to reshape the conversation about women's rights, equality, and justice on a global scale. And she was going to take it. Later that evening, as Naomi sat in her office reflecting on the day's events, a wave of gratitude washed over her. She thought of her father, the man whose legacy had been so nearly lost, but who had unknowingly prepared her for this very moment. His lessons had never been just about business or wealth. They had been about integrity, about standing up for what was right, and about using power for good. She could almost hear his voice now, steady and reassuring, as if he were standing right beside her. "You are the future, Lena," he would say. "You'll face challenges, but you'll never let them break you. Your strength comes from the truth you carry. Never forget that." Her thoughts were interrupted by a soft knock on the door, and Malik entered the room, his smile warm, but tinged with the exhaustion of someone who had been through the storm with her. "You did it, Lena," he said, his voice full of pride. "You've made your mark. The world's watching." Naomi smiled, her eyes glistening with emotion. "We've all made our mark, Malik. It's not just about me. It's about everyone who has ever fought for their voice to be heard." As Malik sat across from her, she felt a sense of peace settle in her heart. She wasn't just a woman who had fought back. She was a woman who had built something lasting, something that would stand the test of time. And she wasn't done yet. The future was hers, and she was ready to make it her own. With that, Naomi stood, her eyes fixed on the horizon. The sun was setting, casting a warm glow over the city, and she knew that this was just the beginning. The empire she had built would be her legacy, one that would inspire generations to come. And with that, she took her first step into the future, one she had forged with her own hands. Thank you for following Naomi's journey through betrayal, resilience, and triumph. We hope this story inspired you to never underestimate the strength of those who refuse to stay silent. What did you think of the twists and turns? We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more thrilling stories like this. Stay tuned for the next chapter and join us in the conversation. Let us know where you're watching from and what you think will happen.